The last rays of sunset painted the dry, dusty main street of Seligman, Arizona, in shades of amber and gold as Katherine Valentine clutched her 6-month-old son William tighter to her chest. The stagecoach that had carried them across 200 miles of unforgiving territory finally rolling to a stop. Exhausted and with only $3 to her name, she stepped down onto the wooden platform, her gaze sweeping across the rugged frontier town that would either be her salvation or her demise. "End of the line, madam," the stagecoach driver said gruffly, tossing her worn carpetbag onto the dirt. "This here's Seligman." Katherine nodded her thanks, adjusting William in her arms as she surveyed the scene before her. A single street lined with wooden buildings, a saloon with piano music spilling out into the evening air, a general store with its shutters half closed for the night, and beyond that, the vast, open landscape of the Arizona Territory stretching endlessly toward the horizon. It was 1885, and Katherine Valentine was 22 years old, alone and desperate. 6 months ago, she had believed Richard Thompson's promises of love and a future together. 6 months ago, she had given birth to William alone in a boarding house in St. Louis, only to discover that Richard had fled in the night, taking what little savings she had managed to put aside from her work as a seamstress. "There now, William," she whispered, brushing her lips against her son's downy head as he fussed against her shoulder. "This is our new beginning." The baby whimpered, and Katherine felt the familiar ache of worry. His cough had worsened during the journey, and the milk she had purchased at the last stop was nearly gone. Finding work and a place to stay before her meager funds ran out was imperative, but first she needed to find help for William. "Excuse me," she called to an older woman sweeping the boardwalk in front of what appeared to be a small hotel. "Is there a doctor in town?" The woman paused, leaning on her broom as she assessed Katherine with shrewd eyes. "Doc Miller's office is 2 doors down, but he rode out to the Richardson place this morning. Their boy broke his leg, won't be back till tomorrow." Her gaze softened as it fell on William. "Little one sick?" "Just a cough, but I'm worried it's getting worse," Katherine admitted. The woman nodded. "Well, Miss Porter at the general store knows her medicines. She might be able to help. Store's closing soon, though, so you'd best hurry." Katherine thanked her and hurried down the boardwalk, the weight of her carpetbag pulling at her arm and her corset digging uncomfortably into her ribs. The bell above the general store door jingled as she entered, and a slender woman with graying hair glanced up from behind the counter where she was tallying the day's receipts. "We're nearly closed," she began, but her expression changed when she saw the baby. "Oh my, come in, come in." "You look done in, dear. My son has a cough," Katherine explained. "I was told you might know of something to help." Miss Porter came around the counter, gently touching William's forehead with the back of her hand. "He's a bit warm. Let me fix you something. I have a syrup that works wonders for the little ones." She paused, studying Katherine's face. "You're new in town, just arrived." "Yes, on the evening coach." "And staying where?" Katherine hesitated. "I haven't arranged accommodations yet. I was hoping to find work first." Miss Porter's lips thinned with concern. "Work isn't easy to come by for a woman with a baby in tow. What skills do you have?" "I'm a skilled seamstress. I can cook, clean, keep accounts. I'll do anything honest," Katherine replied, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. Miss Porter nodded, turning to mix a spoonful of dark syrup into a small bottle. "Mrs. Donnelly at the hotel might need help with laundry and mending. And Xander Caldwell might be looking for someone at the ranch house. His housekeeper just left to care for her sister in Flagstaff." "Xander Caldwell," Katherine repeated, carefully administering the sweet-smelling syrup to William, who accepted it with only minor protest. "Owns the largest cattle operation in the county." The broken spur. Decent man, fair employer, keeps to himself mostly since his wife passed 3 years back. Miss Porter wrapped the remaining syrup in brown paper. Take this for the baby, no charge. I couldn't possibly consider it a welcome to Seligman. The older woman smiled kindly. Now let me close up here and I'll walk you over to the hotel. Mrs. Donnelly usually has a room available, and her rates are reasonable. An hour later, Katherine found herself in a small but clean room on the second floor of the Seligman Hotel, having negotiated with the practical Mrs. Donnelly to exchange 4 hours of work each day for room and board. It wasn't ideal. She would need more income to build any kind of future, but it was a start. William had fallen into a fitful sleep after she'd given him the medicine, his breathing still labored but less raspy than before. Katherine unpacked her few belongings, washed her face and hands in the basin provided, and changed into her nightgown. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she lay beside her son on the narrow bed, her mind racing with worries and plans. Dawn found her already dressed and ready. William fed from the last of her milk and nestled in a makeshift sling across her chest. Mrs. Donnelly had directed her to begin by helping with breakfast service and then tackling the pile of mending that had accumulated over the past weeks. My eyesight isn't what it used to be, the hotel proprietress explained as she showed Katherine to a small workroom off the kitchen where a collection of torn sheets, tablecloths, and garments awaited attention. By midday, Katherine had made significant progress on the mending and had received compliments from Mrs. Donnelly on her fine stitching. William had been fussy but manageable, and the medicine from Miss Porter seemed to be helping his cough. "You're doing fine work, Mrs. Donnelly said, peering at a tablecloth Katherine had mended so skillfully the tear was nearly invisible. "If you can sew like this, you should speak with Mr. Caldwell about the position at the ranch. The pay would be better than what I can offer." "Do you think he would consider a woman with a baby?" Katherine asked, not daring to hope. "Xander's a practical man. If you can do the work, he won't mind the baby, and the ranch house has plenty of space." Mrs. Donnelly paused. "He'll be in town today for supplies. Usually stops by here for a meal around 3 o'clock. At precisely 3 o'clock, Katherine had finished her work for Mrs. Donnelly and positioned herself near the dining room, William dozing against her shoulder. She was nervous but determined. If there was a chance at better employment, a real wage instead of just room and board, she had to take it. The dining room door swung open, and a tall man entered, removing his hat to reveal thick, dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to hard work and responsibility, his sun-weathered face serious but not unkind. Several patrons greeted him as he passed, and he acknowledged each with a nod before taking a seat at a corner table. Mrs. Donnelly caught Katherine's eye and gestured subtly toward the man. "That's Mr. Caldwell," she whispered. "Go on, speak with him." Gathering her courage, Katherine approached the table. "Mr. Caldwell, excuse me for interrupting your meal." Xander Caldwell looked up, his steel-gray eyes assessing her with a directness that was neither rude nor particularly welcoming. "Yes, my name is Katherine Valentine. I arrived in Seligman yesterday, and Mrs. Donnelly mentioned you might be seeking help at your ranch house." He studied her for a moment, his gaze briefly taking in the baby sleeping against her shoulder. "You're right. I am looking for someone. My housekeeper of 10 years left rather suddenly. The position involves cooking, cleaning, and general household management for myself, and occasionally the ranch hands when they take meals at the main house. I'm experienced in all those areas, sir." "And the child?" he asked, nodding toward William. Katherine steeled herself. My son won't interfere with my duties. He's generally well-behaved and I'm accustomed to working with him. A flicker of something, perhaps sympathy, perhaps curiosity, crossed Caldwell's face. It's not an easy life out at the ranch, Mrs. Valentine. We're 15 miles from town and the work is demanding. It's Miss Valentine, she corrected quietly, and I'm not afraid of hard work. His eyebrows rose slightly. I see. He seemed to consider for a moment before continuing. The position pays $20 a month, with room and board provided. You'd have Sundays off, and transportation to town can be arranged when needed. $20 a month was more than Katherine had dared to hope for. With careful saving, she could begin to build a future for William and herself. That would be acceptable, Mr. Caldwell. Very well. He nodded decisively. I'll be heading back to the ranch after I complete my business in town. If you can be ready by 4:30, you can ride back with me. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I'll be ready. As Katherine turned to leave, William stirred and began to fuss, his face scrunching up as he let out a weak cry. Your boy doesn't sound well, Caldwell observed, his tone neutral. He has a cough. Miss Porter provided a syrup that's helping. Caldwell nodded. Doc Miller's a good man. You should have the boy seen by him before we leave town. Katherine hesitated, unwilling to admit she wasn't sure she could afford the doctor's fee. Something in her expression must have revealed her concern because Caldwell added, The ranch accounts for medical care for all who work at the Broken Spur. That would include your boy. Relief washed over her. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. 4:30, he reminded her. I don't like to ride after dark. Katherine hurried back to her room to pack her meager belongings, her heart racing with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The position at the ranch seemed promising better pay than she had expected, room and board, and even medical care for William. Yet she couldn't help but worry about the isolation, about being 15 miles from town with a man she didn't know. Still, what choice did she have? This was the opportunity she needed to start building a life for herself and William. By 4 o'clock, she had packed, settled her account with Mrs. Donnelly, and taken William to see Doc Miller, who had returned to town. The doctor, a kindly older man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, examined William thoroughly. Bronchial inflammation, he diagnosed. Not uncommon in infants, especially after travel. Miss Porter's syrup is a good start, but I'll give you something stronger. Keep him warm, make sure he gets plenty of fluids. He glanced up at Katherine. And you look like you could use some rest yourself, young lady. I've taken a position at the Broken Spur, Katherine explained. Doc Miller's expression brightened. Ah, with Caldwell, good man, takes care of his people. He handed her a small bottle. 3 drops in the morning and evening. Come see me when you're next in town or send word if the boy worsens. At precisely 4:30, Katherine stood outside the hotel with her carpetbag at her feet and William, calmer after the doctor's medicine, nestled in her arms. A wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses drew up, with Xander Caldwell at the reins and the back loaded with supplies. He nodded to her. Miss Valentine, right on time. He hopped down from the wagon and lifted her carpetbag, securing it among the supplies. Then, to her surprise, he extended his hands toward William. May I? It'll be easier for you to climb up if I hold him. After a moment's hesitation, Katherine handed William to him, watching carefully as the rancher cradled her son with unexpected gentleness. Caldwell held the baby competently, supporting his head and speaking to him in a low, soothing voice as Katherine climbed onto the wagon seat. You've handled babies before, she observed as he handed William back to her. A shadow crossed his face. Once upon a time. He didn't elaborate further, instead walking around to climb up beside her and take the reins. With a click of his tongue and a gentle flick, The horses moved forward, and they were on their way out of Seligman. The journey to the broken spur took nearly 2 hours, during which Caldwell spoke little, occasionally pointing out landmarks or explaining aspects of the ranch operation. Katherine learned that the broken spur ran nearly 1,000 head of cattle across 30,000 acres, employed 12 full-time ranch hands, and had been established by Caldwell's father 25 years earlier. "Pa died 8 years ago," he explained. "Left the ranch to me. Been running it ever since." "It sounds like a significant responsibility," Katherine ventured. He nodded. "It is, but it's a good life. Honest work." As they crested a rise, the ranch house came into view, nestled in a small valley with a creek running nearby. It was larger than Katherine had expected, a substantial 2-story structure built of sturdy logs and stone, with a broad porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and in the distance, she could see corrals and a large barn. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. Something that might have been pride flickered across Caldwell's face. "Pa built it with an eye to the future, wanted to stand for generations." He guided the wagon up to the house and helped Katherine down before unloading her carpet bag and several crates of supplies. A younger man emerged from one of the outbuildings and approached to help with the unloading. "Jake, this is Miss Valentine," Caldwell introduced. "She's taking over for Mrs. Henshaw. Miss Valentine, this is Jake Miller, one of our hands. He helps around the main house when needed." Jake tipped his hat. "Madam." His curious gaze lingered briefly on William before he turned his attention to unloading the supplies. Caldwell led Katherine into the house, which proved to be just as impressive inside as out. The main floor contained a spacious kitchen with a large wood-burning stove, a dining room that could seat at least a dozen, a comfortable sitting room with well-worn leather furniture, and Caldwell's study. Upstairs were 5 bedrooms and a small sitting area. "This will be your room," Caldwell said, opening a door to reveal a pleasant chamber with a double bed, dresser, washstand, and rocking chair. A smaller adjoining room had clearly been hastily prepared with a crib. "Had Jake bring this down from the attic when I learned you had a child." Katherine was touched by the consideration. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," he nodded briskly. "Get settled. Supper's usually at 6, but given the late hour and your journey, we'll keep it simple tonight. Kitchen's fully stocked. I'll have Jake bring up hot water for a bath if you'd like." "That would be wonderful, thank you." Left alone, Katherine sat on the edge of the bed, William drowsing in her arms, and allowed herself a moment of relief. The room was clean and comfortable, far better than she had dared to hope. The crib was an unexpected kindness, and Caldwell, while reserved, seemed fair and considerate. Perhaps, just perhaps, she and William would be all right after all. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Katherine rose early, determined to prove her worth from the outset. William had slept better than he had in days, the doctor's medicine having eased his breathing considerably. She fed him, changed his clothes, and settled him in the crib with a soft toy she had fashioned from scraps of cloth, before heading downstairs to prepare breakfast. She found Caldwell already in the kitchen, coffee brewing on the stove. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," she greeted, somewhat startled to find him there. "I apologize if I'm late." "You're not," he assured her. "I'm always up before dawn. Ranch work doesn't wait." He poured coffee into a mug and offered it to her. "Thought you might need this. Thank you." She accepted the coffee gratefully. "Is there anything specific you prefer for breakfast?" "Nothing fancy. Eggs, bacon, maybe biscuits if there's time." "Usually just me for breakfast. Occasionally Jake if he's working around the house." "The hands eat at the bunkhouse." Katherine nodded, quickly locating the supplies she needed and setting to work. As she prepared the meal, She explained her plan for the day, cleaning the downstairs in the morning, laundry in the afternoon, with breaks to tend to William as needed. Caldwell listened, occasionally asking a practical question or offering information about how things had been done previously. He didn't seem bothered by her references to William's needs, which she found reassuring. Breakfast proved simple but satisfying, and Katherine was pleased when Caldwell ate heartily and commented favorably on her biscuits. As he rose to leave, he paused. "I'll be working with the hands on the north pasture today. Should be back by supper." He hesitated, then added, "If your boy needs anything medicine or such, Jake can ride for Doc Miller." "Thank you, but I think he's already improving," Katherine replied. "The medicine is helping." Caldwell nodded. "Good. Well, the house is yours to manage as you see fit." Mrs. Henshaw left things in good order. After he'd gone, Katherine found that was indeed the case. The house, while in need of a thorough cleaning after 2 weeks without a housekeeper, was well organized and well supplied. She spent the morning sweeping, dusting, and polishing, checking on William frequently and bringing him downstairs to rest in a nest of blankets where she could watch him while she worked. By midday, the downstairs gleamed, and she had prepared a simple lunch for herself and Jake, who had been repairing a broken shutter. The young ranch hand proved to be friendly and talkative, filling her in on the rhythms of ranch life, and with very little prompting, sharing what he knew about Xander Caldwell. "Best boss a man could ask for," Jake insisted. "Fair, honest, expects hard work but never asks a man to do something he wouldn't do himself." He hesitated before adding, "Been through some rough times, though. Lost his wife and baby 3 years back. Childbirth fever, they say, hit him hard. Doesn't talk about it much. Well, doesn't talk much at all nowadays, but he's a good man at heart." The information gave Katherine a new perspective on her employer's reserved manner and his unexpected gentleness with William. It also explained the sadness she occasionally glimpsed in his eyes. As the days passed, Katherine settled into a routine at the Broken Spur. She rose early to prepare breakfast, spent her mornings cleaning and maintaining the house, afternoons doing laundry or baking, and evenings preparing supper. William's health improved dramatically with proper rest and medicine, and he proved to be a cheerful, sociable baby who charmed even the gruffest ranch hands when they saw him. Caldwell remained reserved but polite, gradually becoming more comfortable with Katherine's presence in his home. He always asked after William's well-being and occasionally stopped to speak softly to the baby when he encountered them. Katherine noticed that while he was gentle with William, he also maintained a certain distance, as if afraid to become too attached. 2 weeks after her arrival at the ranch, Katherine was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she spotted Caldwell returning with several of the hands, driving a small herd of cattle toward the nearest corral. Even from a distance, she could see something was wrong. Caldwell was slumped in the saddle, and one of the hands was riding close beside him, as if ready to offer support. She watched anxiously as they reached the corral. Caldwell dismounted with obvious difficulty, and even from where she stood, Katherine could see the dark stain spreading across his shirt. Without hesitation, she gathered William from his blanket on the grass and hurried toward the corral. As she approached, she heard Jake's voice raised in concern. "Boss, that needs stitching. Let me ride for the doc." "No time," Caldwell grunted. "Those strays from the Webster place will be crossing onto our land by nightfall. Need all hands to head them off." "But sir, it's just a cut, Jake." Katherine reached them then, taking in the situation with a quick glance. Caldwell's shirt was torn at the shoulder, and blood seeped steadily from what appeared to be a deep gash. "Mr. Caldwell," she said firmly, "that needs immediate attention." He turned, surprise flickering across his face at her tone. "It's nothing, Miss Valentine. With all due respect, sir, it's not nothing. It's a deep cut that could become infected if not properly cleaned and stitched." She turned to Jake. "Help Mr. Caldwell to the house, please. I'll tend to his wound." To her surprise, Caldwell didn't argue further, perhaps too tired or in too much pain to resist. With Jake's assistance, he made his way to the house and into the kitchen, where Katherine had already begun gathering supplies: clean cloths, a basin of hot water, whiskey for disinfecting, and the small sewing kit she kept for mending. "Jake, the men can handle the strays without you for an hour," Caldwell said, his voice strained. "Ride for Doc Miller." "Yes, sir." Jake hurried out, leaving Katherine alone with Caldwell. "I need to remove your shirt to clean the wound properly," she said, all business despite the flutter of nervousness she felt. She had never tended such a serious injury before, but she couldn't let him see her uncertainty. Caldwell nodded, attempting to unbutton his shirt but wincing as the movement pulled at his injured shoulder. Without comment, Katherine gently moved his hands aside and unbuttoned the shirt herself, carefully peeling the blood-soaked fabric away from the wound. The gash was about 4 inches long across his shoulder, deep enough to need stitches but not, thankfully, down to the bone. Caldwell was lean but powerfully built, his chest and arms hardened by years of physical labor. Katherine kept her focus on the wound, professional despite the unexpected intimacy of the situation. "What happened?" she asked as she began to clean the area with a cloth soaked in hot water. He hissed through his teeth at the contact. "Barbed wire. One of the newer strands had come loose. Caught it while chasing a stray calf." Katherine nodded, working methodically to clean away the blood and dirt. "This will hurt," she warned as she reached for the whiskey. "Not my first injury, Miss Valentine," he replied grimly. Nevertheless, he couldn't suppress a sharp intake of breath as she poured the whiskey over the wound. His hand gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white, but he made no other sound of complaint. "You'll need stitches," she told him after examining the clean wound. "I can do it, but it won't be as neat as the doctor's work." "I trust your hands," he said simply. The statement, delivered with such straightforward confidence, touched something in Katherine. She threaded a needle with steady fingers and began the delicate work of stitching the wound closed. Caldwell remained perfectly still, his breathing controlled, his eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. "You've done this before," he observed after she had placed several neat stitches. "My father was a doctor," she explained, focused on her task. "I often assisted him. He insisted I learn basic medical skills." "Your father taught you well." Katherine hesitated, then continued her work. "Yes, he did. He passed away 2 years ago. I'm sorry." She tied off another stitch. "Thank you. He was a good man, dedicated to helping others." "And your mother?" "Died when I was 14. Influenza." Caldwell was quiet for a moment. "You've known loss then?" "Yes." Katherine placed the final stitch and reached for a clean bandage. "As have you, from what I understand." His body tensed beneath her hands. "Jake talks too much." "He respects you greatly," she assured him. "He only mentioned it because he wanted me to understand certain things about the household." Caldwell didn't respond immediately. Katherine finished bandaging his shoulder in silence, acutely aware of his discomfort with the subject. Finally, as she was packing away the supplies, he spoke. "Her name was Eliza. We were married 5 years when we lost her, and the baby." Katherine's hands stilled. "I'm very sorry. It was a difficult birth. The baby, a boy, came too early." Eliza held on for 3 days afterward, but the fever. He shook his head. "Doc Miller did everything he could." "I can't imagine your pain," Katherine said softly. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw raw grief still fresh after 3 years. "When I saw you step off that stage coach with your boy, He stopped, seeming to catch himself. "Well, it doesn't matter. You've made a good start here." Before Katherine could respond, they heard the sound of horses approaching. "That'll be Jake with the doctor," Caldwell said, clearly relieved by the interruption. Doc Miller pronounced Katherine's stitching damn fine work and prescribed rest for the injured shoulder, advice Caldwell promptly ignored once the doctor had left, insisting on returning to work despite Katherine's protests. "Cattle won't wait, Miss Valentine," he said firmly. "I'll be careful with the shoulder." The incident marked a subtle shift in their relationship. Caldwell remained reserved, but there was a new ease between them. He began to linger longer at meals, occasionally sharing stories about the ranch or asking Katherine about her life before coming to Seligman. He took more interest in William, too, sometimes sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee while the baby played on a blanket nearby, watching with a wistful expression that tugged at Katherine's heart. As for Katherine, she found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet rancher. His kindness, integrity, and the gentle way he interacted with William despite his own pain impressed her deeply. She began to look forward to their brief conversations, to appreciate the steady reliability of his presence. One evening, about a month after Katherine's arrival at the Broken Spur, a powerful summer storm blew in from the west. Thunder crashed overhead, lightning split the sky, and rain pelted against the windows with such force it seemed determined to break through the glass. William, frightened by the thunder, was inconsolable. Katherine paced the floor of their room trying to soothe him, but nothing seemed to help. Finally, desperate for a change of scene that might distract him, she carried him downstairs. To her surprise, she found Caldwell in the sitting room, a lamp burning low beside him as he reviewed ranch accounts. He looked up as she entered, raising an eyebrow at William's distressed cries. "Storm's frightening him," Katherine explained, raising her voice to be heard over both the baby's wails and a particularly loud crack of thunder. "I thought walking him might help." Caldwell set aside his papers and stood. "May I?" he asked, extending his arms. Somewhat surprised, Katherine handed William to him. Caldwell cradled the baby against his chest and began to walk slowly around the room, speaking in a low, soothing voice that Katherine couldn't quite make out over the storm. To her astonishment, William's cries began to subside. Within minutes, he was hiccuping softly, his eyes fixed on Caldwell's face with fascination as the rancher continued his gentle monologue. "You have a way with him," Katherine observed, watching in wonder. Caldwell gave a small, sad smile. "My father used to say I had a knack for calming skittish colts. Perhaps it extends to babies." Another crash of thunder shook the house, and William startled but didn't resume crying. Caldwell continued his slow circuit of the room, one large hand gently patting the baby's back. "What were you telling him?" Katherine asked curiously. "Just ranch talk. The price of cattle, the new stallion we're breaking, how the north pasture needs rotating." His expression turned sheepish. "Nothing interesting." "It seems to interest him," Katherine pointed out, gesturing to William, who was now contentedly chewing on his fist as he listened to Caldwell's deep voice. "Babies are easily impressed," Caldwell replied, but there was warmth in his tone as he looked down at William. Katherine settled into an armchair, watching the two of them with a strange tightness in her chest. There was something so natural, so right about the sight of William in Caldwell's strong arms. It stirred feelings. She hadn't expected longings for things she had resigned herself to never having after Richard's abandonment. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the sitting room, A different kind of atmosphere developed, a quiet intimacy born of shared responsibility and growing trust. Caldwell eventually sat in his chair again, William still content in his arms, and they really talked for the first time. He asked about her life in St. Louis, and Katherine found herself telling him about her work as a seamstress, her dreams of someday owning her own dress shop, and how those dreams had been derailed by Richard's seduction and abandonment. "I was foolish," she admitted. "He was charming, handsome, full of promises about our future together. I believed him when he said he loved me." She glanced at William, now drowsing against Caldwell's chest. "I don't regret my son, never that, but I wish I'd been wiser." "The fault lies with him, not you," Caldwell said firmly. "A man who abandons his responsibilities isn't worth your regret." The conviction in his voice stirred Katherine's curiosity. "You seem to feel strongly about this." Caldwell was quiet for a moment, his hand absently stroking William's back. "My father raised me to believe that a man's word is his bond, and his responsibility to those who depend on him is sacred. A man who walks away from that isn't a man at all." "And William's father?" Katherine asked tentatively. Caldwell's expression hardened. "What do you know of him?" "Very little, in truth. Richard Thompson was a traveling salesman who stayed at the boarding house where I worked. He courted me for months, promised marriage, then disappeared when I told him I was expecting." "Did you try to find him?" Katherine nodded. "I did, but it was as if he vanished. The company he claimed to work for had never heard of him. The address he gave me in Chicago doesn't exist." She sighed. "I've had to accept that he never intended to stay, that everything between us was a lie." Caldwell's gaze dropped to William, now fully asleep against his shoulder. "The boy deserves better," he said quietly. "Yes," Katherine agreed. "He does. That's why I came west. I wanted a fresh start, somewhere Richard would never find us, even if he changed his mind." She hesitated, then added, "Not that I believe he will." Richard wanted freedom from responsibility, not a wife and child. The storm began to subside, the thunder growing more distant and the rain softening to a gentle patter against the windows. William slept peacefully, undisturbed by the occasional rumble from the retreating storm. "I should put him to bed," Katherine said, rising and approaching Caldwell. He nodded, carefully transferring the sleeping baby to her arms, his hands lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Miss Valentine." "Good night, Mr. Caldwell." Katherine paused at the door, looking back at him. "And thank you for everything." He met her gaze, something unreadable in his gray eyes. "You're welcome." As Katherine carried William upstairs, she found herself more confused than ever about her feelings for Xander Caldwell. The reserved rancher was becoming increasingly important to her, but she had been burned before by trusting too easily. And even if her growing affection for him was justified, there was no indication he felt anything beyond kindness and perhaps a sense of responsibility toward her and William. For now, she decided, it was enough that they had found a safe haven at the Broken Spur. The future would have to take care of itself. The weeks that followed brought a gradual deepening of the connection between Katherine and Caldwell. Though neither spoke of it directly, there was a new awareness between them, a careful dance of growing attraction tempered by caution on both sides. Katherine threw herself into her work at the ranch, taking pride in transforming the house into a true home. She planted a kitchen garden, sewed new curtains for the sitting room, and introduced small touches, wildflowers in jars, fresh baked bread every morning, polished silver on the table that brought warmth and comfort to spaces that had been merely functional before her arrival. Caldwell noticed. "The place hasn't felt like this since Eliza," he commented one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, William playing with carved wooden animals Jake had made for him. "I hope that doesn't pain you," Katherine said carefully. He considered her words. "No," he finally said. "It feels right." Life returning. William chose that moment to toddle over to Caldwell's chair, pulling himself up on unsteady legs and offering the rancher a wooden horse with a solemn expression. "Well, thank you, young man," Caldwell said gravely, accepting the gift. "Fine craftsmanship, this." William beamed at him, then reached up with his arms in the universal request to be lifted. Without hesitation, Caldwell complied, settling the boy on his knee and pointing to distant shapes on the horizon, naming each one in his deep, steady voice as William listened with rapt attention. Katherine watched them, her heart full. William had begun to flourish under Caldwell's quiet attention, responding to the rancher's deep voice with delighted babbles and reaching for him whenever he entered a room. And Caldwell, for his part, seemed increasingly comfortable with the child, his initial reserve giving way to genuine affection. It was difficult, Katherine thought, not to imagine them as a true family, to envision a future where Caldwell was not just their employer but something more permanent in their lives. But such thoughts were dangerous. She had been wrong about a man before, with devastating consequences. Yet everything she observed about Xander Caldwell spoke of honor and integrity. The way he treated his men with respect but firmness, the fairness he showed in business dealings, the quiet kindness he extended to those in need, all painted a picture of a man nothing like the charming, deceptive Richard. One afternoon in late August, Katherine was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Jake burst in, his face tight with urgency. "Miss Valentine is the boss here." "No, he rode out to check the south fence line this morning." "What's wrong?" "Riders coming. 4 of them. Don't recognize them, but they don't look friendly." Jake glanced toward William, who was napping in a basket Katherine had lined with soft blankets. "Might be nothing, but it's better to be cautious," Katherine finished. "What should we do?" "I've sent one of the boys to find Mr. Caldwell. The rest are continuing with their work, but they are armed." Jake checked the rifle he carried. "I think you and the little one should wait upstairs until we know what these fellows want." Katherine nodded, quickly gathering William, who whimpered at being disturbed but settled back to sleep against her shoulder. She hurried upstairs to her room, her heart racing. In the months she had been at the Broken Spur, there had been occasional visitors, neighboring ranchers, cattle buyers, supply deliverymen, but never any cause for alarm. From her window, she could see the approaching riders, 4 men, as Jake had said, their horses kicking up dust as they made their way toward the ranch house. They didn't ride in the straight, purposeful manner of men on legitimate business, but rather spread out slightly, approaching with a watchfulness that seemed predatory even from a distance. Katherine drew back from the window, not wanting to be seen. She placed William in his crib and moved to the dresser where she kept a small revolver Caldwell had insisted she learn to use, just in case. She checked that it was loaded, her hands steady despite her fear, and positioned herself where she could watch the yard below while remaining hidden. The riders reached the house and dismounted. From her vantage point, she could see they were rough-looking men, trail-worn and armed. 3 remained mounted while the 4th, a tall man with a shock of sandy hair beneath his hat, approached the porch where Jake now stood, rifle held casually, but ready. Katherine couldn't hear their exchange, but she could see the tension in Jake's stance, the dismissive gestures of the sandy-haired man. After several minutes, the visitor turned and gestured to his companions, who dismounted and followed him toward the bunkhouse, Jake walking stiffly behind them. Katherine remained at her post, watching anxiously. Had these men come for information? Supplies? Were they simply passing through, or did they have more sinister intentions? She wished Caldwell would return not just for protection, but for the sense of security his presence always brought. Almost as if her thoughts had summoned him, she spotted a rider approaching from the east Caldwell, riding hard toward the ranch. He had clearly been alerted by the hand Jake had sent to find him. Katherine watched as Caldwell reached the yard, dismounted in one fluid motion and strode toward the bunkhouse where the visitors had gone. His posture was alert, his hand never far from the gun at his hip, but he didn't appear panicked or overly concerned. Several tense minutes passed before the bunkhouse door opened and the men emerged, first Caldwell and Jake, then the four strangers. There appeared to be a brief but intense conversation, with Caldwell speaking firmly, his stance unyielding. Finally, the sandy-haired man spat on the ground, said something that made his companions laugh, and they all mounted their horses. As they rode away, Caldwell watched until they were out of sight, then turned and headed quickly toward the main house. Katherine set down the revolver and hurried downstairs to meet him, relief washing over her. "What happened?" she asked as he entered, his face grim. "Who were those men?" "Trouble," he said succinctly, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "Gang of drifters working their way through the territory. They've been causing problems at other ranches, stealing cattle, demanding supplies, intimidating isolated homesteads. What did they want here? Work, they claimed, but men like that don't want honest labor." He glanced around. "William." Upstairs, still napping, he slept through everything. Caldwell nodded, seeming relieved. "Good. I've doubled the watch tonight and I've sent word to the sheriff in Seligman. Those men won't find easy pickings at the Broken Spur." "You think they'll come back?" His expression hardened. "Possibly. Their leader, fellow called Dixon, didn't take kindly to being turned away." He looked at her, concern evident in his eyes. "I don't want you to worry, but I'd like you and William to stay close to the house for the next few days." "Of course." He hesitated, then said, "I'm sorry to bring trouble to your doorstep, Katherine." It was the first time he had called her by her first name, and despite the seriousness of the situation, she felt a small thrill at the intimacy it implied. "It's not your fault," she assured him. "And this is your home. You're not just anything," he interrupted, his voice low but intense. "You and William. You're important to this place now, important to me." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither was quite ready to fully acknowledge. Katherine's heart beat faster as she met his gaze, seeing in it a reflection of her own confused emotions: attraction, uncertainty, hope. Before either could speak further, William's cry echoed from upstairs, breaking the moment. Katherine stepped back, flustered. "I should go to him." Caldwell nodded, his expression unreadable once more. "Of course." As Katherine hurried upstairs, her mind raced with the implications of Caldwell's words. Important to him. What did that mean exactly? Was it merely the appreciation of an employer for a valued housekeeper? Concern for a woman and child under his protection? Or something deeper, something that matched the feelings growing in her own heart? The question remained unanswered in the days that followed, as the incident with Dixon and his men cast a shadow over the ranch. Caldwell was preoccupied with security measures, sending men out in pairs, keeping extra watches at night, riding the boundaries of the property himself each day to check for signs of intrusion. Despite his reassurances that there was no immediate danger, Katherine found herself jumping at unexpected sounds and keeping William even closer than usual. The peaceful routine they had established felt threatened, and with it, the sense of home she had begun to build at the Broken Spur. 4 tense days passed without further incident. On the 5th morning, Caldwell announced at breakfast that he needed to ride into Seligman to meet with the sheriff and would be gone overnight. "I don't like leaving with Dixon and his men possibly still in the area," he admitted. "But the sheriff has information about where they might be heading. If we can direct the territorial marshals to their location, we might prevent them from causing more trouble." "We'll be fine," Katherine assured him, though the prospect of his absence made her uneasy. "Jake and the others will keep watch." "Jake will stay at the main house tonight," Caldwell said firmly. "And Katherine—" He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document. "I'd like you to keep this safe while I'm gone." She accepted the paper curiously. "What is it?" "The deed to the broken spur, and my will." His expression was solemn. "If anything should happen to me, I want to be sure you and William are provided for." Katherine stared at him in shock. "Mr. Caldwell Zander, nothing is going to happen to you." "Probably not," he agreed. "But a man in my position needs to be practical. The document names you as guardian of the property until William comes of age, at which point it passes to him." "William," she repeated, bewildered. "But why would you leave your ranch to my son?" Caldwell met her gaze steadily. "Because I've come to care for him as if he were my own, and for you, Katherine, more than I thought possible after Eliza." Katherine's hand trembled as she held the document. "Zander, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything now." His voice was gentle. "Just keep it safe. We can talk more when I return tomorrow." With that, he rose, briefly touching her shoulder as he passed a gesture at once comforting and full of promise, and left to prepare for his journey. Katherine remained at the table, the document clutched in her hand, her mind reeling. Caldwell had just implied he wanted to make William his heir, to make them both permanent parts of his life. It was overwhelming, unexpected, and yet, wasn't it what she had secretly begun to hope for? She spent the day in a daze, going through her usual routines mechanically, while her thoughts raced ahead to Caldwell's return and the conversation he had promised. By evening, she had convinced herself that she was ready to open her heart again, to trust in the steady, honorable man who had brought such unexpected joy back into her life. Jake took up his post on the porch after supper, rifle across his knees, assuring Katherine that all was quiet and she should rest easy. She put William to bed, tucked Caldwell's precious document into her dresser drawer, and prepared for sleep herself, though she doubted rest would come easily with her mind so full. She had just extinguished her lamp when a sound from downstairs caught her attention, a soft thud, followed by what might have been a muffled curse. Jake, perhaps, coming in for coffee or to check the house. But something about the quality of the noise raised the hair on the back of her neck. Silently, Katherine rose and retrieved the revolver from her dresser. She moved to William's crib, placing herself between it and the door, and listened intently, footsteps multiple sets moving through the lower floor of the house. Too many for just Jake. And too cautious, as if trying to avoid detection. Her heart pounding, Katherine considered her options. She could barricade the door, but that would only delay intruders, not stop them. She could try to escape through the window, but with William, that would be difficult and dangerous. Or she could confront whoever was below, using the advantage of higher ground and surprise. Before she could decide, she heard a pained grunt and the sound of something heavy falling. Jake, she realized with a sinking heart. Then footsteps on the stairs, no longer attempting stealth. Katherine positioned herself beside the door, revolver ready. William, as if sensing danger, remained blessedly quiet in his crib. The footsteps halted outside her door. The handle turned slowly, and the door began to open. Katherine took a deep breath, steadying her aim as a shadowy figure appeared in the doorway. "That's far enough," she said clearly. "I have a gun and I know how to use it." The figure froze. "Well, well," drawled a familiar voice, the sandy-haired Dixon. "Looks like Caldwell's woman has some spirit." "What do you want?" Katherine demanded, grateful for the darkness that hid the trembling of her hands. "Just a friendly visit." Dixon's tone was menacing despite the light words. "Thought we'd help ourselves to some of Caldwell's hospitality while he's away. Word travels fast in these parts, you know. You're not welcome here. Leave now and no one needs to get hurt." Dixon chuckled. "Brave words, madam, but you're outnumbered. My boys have already taken care of your watchdog downstairs, nothing permanent, just a knock on the head. Now, why don't you put down that gun before someone gets hurt? Like that baby I hear breathing over there." Cold fear washed over Katherine at the threat to William, but she kept her voice steady. "If you take one step toward my child, it will be the last step you ever take." Something in her tone must have convinced Dixon of her seriousness because he remained in the doorway, not advancing further. "Let's not be hasty," he said, his voice taking on a wheedling quality. "We're just looking for some supplies, maybe some cash. Caldwell can afford it. You tell us where he keeps his valuables, we take what we need and we'll be on our way. No one gets hurt." Katherine knew she couldn't trust his word, but she also knew she couldn't keep Dixon and his men at bay indefinitely. She needed to buy time, to find a way to alert the ranch hands in the bunkhouse. "Mr. Caldwell doesn't keep money in the house," she said, "but there's a safe in his study." "I don't know the combination." "Now that's a shame," Dixon replied, his tone hardening, "because I think you do, and I think you're going to tell us." Before Katherine could respond, another sound cut through the night: hoofbeats, approaching fast. Dixon cursed and turned toward the hallway. "Who's that?" he demanded of someone Katherine couldn't see. "Riders," came the reply. "At least 3, maybe more. Caldwell, could be. Too dark to see." Dixon turned back to Katherine, his expression now visible in the faint moonlight streaming through the window. "Seems like our visit is being cut short, madam, but don't think this is over." He backed away from the door, barking orders to his companions. Katherine remained frozen in place, the revolver still raised, listening to the men's rapid retreat down the stairs and out the back of the house. Moments later, she heard the thunder of approaching horses in the yard, followed by shouts and what might have been a gunshot. Then, blessedly familiar Caldwell's voice, sharp with authority, calling her name. "Katherine, Katherine, answer me. Upstairs." She called back, finally lowering the revolver as relief flooded through her. "We're upstairs." Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs, and then Caldwell was there, filling the doorway, his expression wild with concern. "Are you hurt, William?" "We're fine," she assured him, setting the gun aside and moving toward him. "They didn't touch us." Caldwell crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could scarcely breathe. "Thank God," he murmured against her hair. "When we saw their horses at the hitching post." Katherine allowed herself to sink into his embrace for a moment, drawing strength from his solid presence before pulling back. "Jake," she said urgently. "They hurt Jake. My men are seeing to him. He's alive, took a blow to the head, but he'll recover." Caldwell's hands moved to frame her face, his eyes searching hers in the darkness. "You're really unharmed?" "Yes," she managed a shaky smile, "though I'm very glad you decided to return tonight instead of tomorrow." "Sheriff got word that Dixon was seen heading this way. We rode straight back." His thumbs gently stroked her cheeks. "Katherine, when I thought you might be in danger." Whatever he meant to say was interrupted by William, who chose that moment to wake, his confused cry piercing the darkness. Katherine turned toward the crib, but Caldwell was already moving, reaching for the baby with gentle hands. "It's all right, little man," he soothed, lifting William and cradling him against his chest. "Everything's all right now." Katherine watched as her son's cries subsided, his small hand clutching at Caldwell's shirt as he settled against the rancher's shoulder. The sight stirred something deep within her, a certainty that had been building for months, now crystallized in this moment of shared danger and relief. "You came back for us," she said softly. Caldwell looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the moonlit room. "I'll always come back for you," he promised. "Both of you." The simple declaration, spoken with such quiet conviction, broke through the last of Catherine's resistance. She crossed to where he stood, and with William nestled between them, rose on tiptoe to press her lips gently against Caldwell's. He remained still for a heartbeat, then responded with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, his free arm encircling her waist to draw her closer. When they finally parted, Catherine saw in his eyes the same emotion that filled her own heart: love, unexpected but undeniable, born of shared purpose and mutual respect rather than fleeting passion or empty promises. "What happens now?" she asked. Caldwell's smile was gentle but determined. "Now we build a future, if that's what you want." "It is," she assured him, "more than anything." The aftermath of Dixon's attempted robbery brought changes to the Broken Spur. Sheriff Miller and his deputies tracked the gang to a camp 15 miles south and arrested them after a brief standoff. With the threat removed, life at the ranch gradually returned to normal, though with a new vigilance that Caldwell insisted would remain standard practice. Jake recovered from his concussion with no lasting effects beyond a spectacular bruise and a tendency to downplay his injury, while simultaneously embellishing the story of his brave but futile attempt to stop 4 armed men single-handedly. More significant, however, was the transformation in Catherine and Caldwell's relationship. No longer merely employer and housekeeper, they navigated a new understanding, a courtship of sorts, though one based on a foundation of deep connection already built. Caldwell was careful, respectful, never presuming upon Catherine's feelings or rushing her toward a commitment she might not be ready for. They took evening walks with William, talking about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. He spoke of Eliza and the pain of losing her and their child. She shared more about her relationship with Richard and the bitter lessons it had taught her about trust. "I was so certain he loved me," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch swing, William asleep inside. "Every promise, every tender word seemed genuine. When I discovered I was expecting, I was frightened but also hopeful. Surely now he would keep his promise to marry me." "What did he say when you told him?" Caldwell asked, his hand warm around hers. Catherine smiled bitterly. "He seemed happy at first. Said all the right things, how we'd be a family, how he'd take care of us. He went out that evening to celebrate and never returned. Took most of my savings with him." "The man's a coward," Caldwell said, his voice tight with anger. "Leaving you to face everything alone." "Not entirely alone," Catherine corrected. "The landlady at my boarding house was kind. She let me work for reduced rent until William was born, and there was a doctor who treated me without charging his usual fee. Still, it should never have happened." Caldwell's jaw was set, his expression grim. "A man has responsibilities." Catherine studied his face in the fading light. "You're very definite about that. My father raised me to believe that a man's actions have consequences, and he must face them squarely." He turned to look at her directly. "Catherine, I need you to understand something. What I feel for you, for both of you, it's not temporary. It's not conditional. If you choose to build a life with me, it's forever." The simple, honest declaration moved her deeply. "I believe you," she said softly. "That's what frightens me sometimes." "I believed before, and I was wrong." "You weren't wrong to believe," he countered. "He was wrong to lie." He hesitated, then added, "I'm not asking for an answer now. I want you to be certain." Catherine squeezed his hand. "I'm more certain every day." 3 weeks after the incident with Dixon, Caldwell suggested they ride into Seligman for the town's harvest festival. It would be William's first real outing beyond the ranch, and Katherine spent the day before preparing sewing a new dress for herself from fabric Caldwell had brought back from his last supply run, and ensuring William's best clothes were cleaned and pressed. The festival was a lively affair, with the entire town turning out for games, food, music, and dancing. Katherine, who had seen little of Seligman since her arrival months earlier, was delighted by the warm welcome she received. The townspeople had clearly heard about her position at the Broken Spur and treated her with a respect that suggested they viewed her as more than just Caldwell's housekeeper. Miss Porter from the general store cooed over how much William had grown. Mrs. Donnelly from the hotel complimented Katherine's dress and whispered that Mr. Caldwell looks mighty pleased to have you on his arm. Even Sheriff Miller made a point of stopping by to shake Caldwell's hand and tip his hat to Katherine, commenting that they made a fine family picture. Throughout the day, Caldwell remained close by her side, his hand often resting lightly at the small of her back. His attention focused on her and William even as he exchanged greetings with neighbors and business associates. It was, Katherine realized, a public declaration of sorts, an announcement to the community that they were together. A unit, a family in the making. As the afternoon waned and lanterns were lit for the evening festivities, a small band assembled on a temporary platform, and couples began to gather for dancing. Caldwell turned to Katherine, a question in his eyes. "Would you care to dance?" He asked formally, though the warmth in his gaze belied the stiffness of his words. Katherine glanced at William, who was contentedly playing with a wooden toy in her lap. "What about William?" "I believe I can help with that," said a familiar voice. Miss Porter approached, smiling. "I'd be happy to watch the little man while you young people enjoy yourselves." With William settled comfortably in Miss Porter's experienced arms, Caldwell led Katherine to the dance area, his hand firm but gentle around hers. The band struck up a waltz, and he drew her into his arms with a grace that surprised her, leading her confidently through the steps. "You dance well," she observed, slightly breathless from both the exertion and the proximity. "Eliza insisted I learn," he replied, a fond smile touching his lips at the memory. "Said no wife of hers would be denied the pleasure of dancing because her husband was too stubborn to learn the steps. She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. His eyes held hers steadily. "As are you, Katherine, different but equally remarkable in your own way." The simple sincerity of the compliment warmed her. "Thank you." They continued to dance, conversation giving way to the simple pleasure of movement and music and closeness. Katherine was acutely aware of Caldwell's hand at her waist, of the strength in his frame as he guided her through the dance, of the admiring glances they received from onlookers. As the music ended, he didn't immediately release her. Instead, he leaned close to speak near her ear, his voice low and meant only for her. "I love you, Katherine. You and William both. I think I have almost from the beginning." The words, though not entirely unexpected given the direction their relationship had been taking, still sent a jolt of joy through her. She drew back slightly to look into his face, seeing there an openness, a vulnerability he rarely displayed. "I love you too," she replied, the admission both frightening and liberating. "I've been afraid to say it, afraid to trust it, but it's true." His smile was like sunrise after a long night. "Then perhaps you'll consider making it official." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, velvet-covered box. "Not here, not with everyone watching, but later when we're alone. Will you hear what I have to say?" Katherine nodded, her heart pounding. "Yes, Xander, I will." The remainder of the festival passed in a blur of happiness for Katherine. She and Caldwell danced several more times, shared a meal with friends and neighbors, and collected an increasingly sleepy William from Miss Porter's care as the evening progressed. By the time they began the journey back to the ranch, William was fast asleep in Catherine's arms, and the first stars were appearing in the velvet sky above. Caldwell drove the wagon at a leisurely pace, seemingly in no hurry to end the perfect day. "He's completely worn out," Katherine observed, glancing down at William's peaceful face. "It's been an exciting day for him, for all of us." Caldwell guided the horses around a bend in the road, then drew them to a halt atop a small rise that offered a view of the valley below, with the lights of the Broken Spur ranch house visible in the distance. "Why are we stopping?" Katherine asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Caldwell set the brake and turned to face her, his expression serious yet tender. "Because what I have to say deserves a moment of its own, not rushed or squeezed between other events." He took the small box from his pocket again and opened it to reveal a delicate gold band set with a single perfect diamond that caught the starlight and reflected it back in tiny flashes of brilliance. "This was my grandmother's," he explained. "My grandfather gave it to her when they decided to make a life together in this territory, back when it was still wild and dangerous. It symbolized his promise to protect her, provide for her, and love her until his dying day." He removed the ring from its box. "I make the same promise to you, Katherine, and to William." Catherine's eyes filled with tears as he continued. "I know you've been hurt before. I know trust doesn't come easily after what you've experienced, but I want you to know that my commitment to you is absolute. I will be a father to William in every way that matters. I will love him as my own son. And I will love you, Katherine Valentine, faithfully and completely, for all the days of my life." He took her free hand, the one not cradling William. "Will you marry me? Will you make the Broken Spur truly your home, and allow me the honor of being your husband and William's father?" Catherine's voice caught on a sob as she replied. "Yes, Xander. Yes to all of it." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if meant for her all along, and then leaned forward to kiss her. A kiss that sealed their promise and spoke of the future they would build together. When they finally continued their journey home, Katherine felt a sense of rightness, of completion, that she had never experienced before. The road ahead might not always be smooth. Life in the territory demanded resilience and courage, but she would face whatever came with Xander by her side and William in her arms. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, a simple but joyful ceremony in the Seligman church, with nearly the entire town in attendance. Katherine wore a gown of ivory silk that she had sewn herself, while William, now nearly 8 months old and recently taking his first unsteady steps, was dressed in a miniature suit that matched Caldwell's. Doc Miller gave the bride away, and Jake served as best man, puffed up with pride at the honor. Miss Porter caught the bouquet, blushing furiously when Sheriff Miller winked at her from across the room. The celebration afterward, held at the Broken Spur, lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and enough food to feed the county. Through it all, Katherine marveled at the turn her life had taken from desperate and alone with a newborn baby to beloved wife and mistress of the largest ranch in the area, surrounded by friends who had become like family. That night, after the guests had departed and William was soundly asleep in the nursery that had once been the small room adjoining Catherine's bedroom, she and Caldwell stood together on the porch of their home, his arm around her waist as they gazed up at the star-filled sky. "Happy, Mrs. Caldwell?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied honestly. He turned her in his arms to face him, There's something I've been meaning to discuss with you about William." "Oh," she looked up at him, curious. "I'd like to adopt him legally. Make him my son in the eyes of the law as well as in my heart." Catherine's breath caught. It was the one thing they hadn't explicitly discussed, though she had hoped for it. "You're certain?" "Absolutely certain." His expression was solemn. "I want him to have my name, to inherit this ranch someday, to know without question that he is my son in every way that matters." Tears welled in Catherine's eyes. "I want that too. Then we'll ride into Seligman next week and speak with Judge Wilson about the legal procedures." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "There's one more thing." "What's that?" "William's birth certificate. It would need to be amended for the adoption." Catherine nodded. "Yes, I suppose it would. His father's name." Caldwell hesitated. "It isn't on the birth record yet, is it?" "No," Catherine admitted. "When he was born, I was still hoping Richard might return, might acknowledge him. When weeks passed and he didn't, I left that space blank, not ready to formalize his abandonment." Caldwell's expression darkened briefly at the mention of Richard, but he nodded in understanding. "That actually simplifies matters legally. Since his name was never recorded, my petition to adopt William should proceed smoothly." Catherine leaned into his embrace, her heart full. "You're already his father in all the ways that matter, Xander. The law will just be catching up to what we already know." 2 months later, on a crisp December morning, Catherine stood beside Caldwell in Judge Wilson's office in Seligman as the final adoption papers were signed and sealed. William, perched on Caldwell's hip, played contentedly with his father's watch chain, oblivious to the legal proceedings that were formalizing what had already become reality. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell," Judge Wilson said, shaking their hands in turn. "Young William is officially William Valentine Caldwell now, with all the rights and privileges of a natural-born son." Caldwell's smile was radiant as he looked at William. "Thank you, Your Honor. This means more to us than words can express." "Well, you've given that boy a name to be proud of," the judge replied, chucking William under the chin. "And from what I hear, you'll be giving him a little brother or sister to play with come summer." Catherine blushed at the reference to her condition, which she and Caldwell had only recently confirmed with Doc Miller. At 3 months along, her pregnancy was still not widely known, though evidently news traveled fast in a small town like Seligman. "Yes, Your Honor," Caldwell confirmed, placing his free hand protectively over Catherine's still flat stomach. "We've been blessed beyond measure." As they left the courthouse and stepped into the bright winter sunlight, Catherine felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun in fear and uncertainty, when she'd stepped off that stagecoach with a tiny baby and $3 to her name, had led her to this moment of perfect contentment. "What are you thinking?" Caldwell asked as he helped her into the wagon. Catherine smiled, watching as he carefully settled William beside her before climbing up to take the reins. "I was thinking about how far we've come. How different things might have been if I hadn't found the courage to leave St. Louis, if I hadn't chosen Seligman, if Mrs. Donnelly hadn't mentioned the position at the Broken Spur. If Richard hadn't abandoned you," Caldwell added quietly. Catherine considered this. "Yes," she agreed after a moment. "As painful as that was, it led me here to you. I can't regret it." Caldwell reached over to take her hand, his expression serious. "His loss is my gain, Catherine, our gain." He glanced at William, now Caldwell in name as well as heart. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure neither of you ever knows that kind of abandonment again." "I know you will," Catherine said softly, "and I'll spend mine making sure you never regret opening your heart and home to us." Caldwell squeezed her hand, then released it to take up the reins. "Home, Mrs. Caldwell." Catherine smiled, her heart full to overflowing as she looked at her husband and son, with a new life growing inside her to complete their family. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell, let's go home." As the wagon rolled away from Seligman and toward the broken spur, Katherine reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had brought her to this place of belonging. She had come west seeking safety and a fresh start. She had found love, acceptance, and a future brighter than any she could have imagined. Richard's abandonment, once the greatest sorrow of her life, had become merely a stepping stone on the journey to true happiness. And William, the innocent child who had suffered his father's rejection before he was even born, would grow up knowing only the steadfast love and protection of the man who had chosen to be his father. The broken spur appeared on the horizon, bathed in winter sunlight, a beacon of home and hope and new beginnings. And as they approached, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that this land, this man, this family they were building together was exactly where she was meant to be. 5 years later, the summer sun beat down on the broken spur as Katherine stood on the porch, shading her eyes against the glare as she watched the activity in the yard. William, now nearly 6 and tall for his age, was showing his 4-year-old brother Thomas how to throw a lasso, the rope falling far short of its target, but earning enthusiastic applause from 2-year-old Margaret, who sat nearby on a blanket under the shade of a cottonwood tree. "Keep your wrist looser, Tommy," William instructed with all the authority of an older brother. "That's how Pa does it." Katherine smiled at the scene, her hand absently caressing the gentle swell of her stomach where their 4th child was growing. Another boy, she suspected, though she hadn't shared her intuition with Xander yet. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the road, where a rider was approaching at a steady pace. Her heart lifted as she recognized her husband returning from his morning rounds of the ranch, earlier than expected. He dismounted with the easy grace that still made her heart skip, even after years of marriage, and handed the reins to one of the hands before striding toward the house. His face lit up when he spotted her on the porch, and he quickened his pace. "You're home early," she observed as he bounded up the steps to join her, "finished faster than I expected." He leaned in to kiss her, his hand automatically finding the curve of her stomach. "How are you feeling today?" "Wonderful," she assured him. "The morning sickness is finally subsiding." His expression was tender as he looked out at their children. "They've been behaving themselves, as well as can be expected," Katherine laughed. "William is taking his responsibilities as oldest very seriously." They watched as William patiently showed Thomas once more how to hold the rope, his small face a study in concentration. Margaret, bored with the lasso lesson, had begun picking wildflowers from the edge of the blanket, her dark curls so like her father's catching the sunlight. "He's a good boy," Caldwell said with quiet pride. "A natural leader." "Like his father," Katherine agreed softly. Caldwell's arm tightened around her waist, and she leaned into his embrace, savoring the moment of peaceful contentment. "Jake rode in with the mail while you were resting," Caldwell said after a moment. "There's a letter for you from St. Louis." Katherine raised her eyebrows in surprise. "St. Louis? I don't know anyone there anymore. It's from a law firm." Caldwell reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope. "Johnson, Mayers, and Burke." Curious, Katherine opened the letter and scanned its contents, her expression changing from puzzlement to shock as she read. "What is it?" Caldwell asked, concern evident in his voice. "It's about Richard," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Richard Thompson, William's birth father." Caldwell stiffened beside her. "What about him?" "He's dead. Killed in a bar fight in Chicago 3 months ago," she continued reading. "Apparently he had no family, no will. But among his possessions, they found letters I had written to him years ago, before William was born. The attorneys are trying to locate any potential heirs. After all this time, Caldwell muttered, his jaw tight. What do they want? Katherine folded the letter carefully. Nothing specific. They're just notifying me as William's mother that if Richard had any estate, William might have a claim as his only known child. He doesn't need anything from that man, Caldwell said firmly. William has everything he needs right here. I know. Katherine placed her hand on his arm, feeling the tension there. Xander, this doesn't change anything. William is your son in every way that matters. The law confirmed that years ago. Caldwell's expression softened as he looked out at William, now laughing as Thomas's lasso attempt went wildly astray. You're right. It doesn't change anything. Should we tell him? Katherine asked hesitantly. Caldwell considered the question. Someday, when he's older, he should know the truth of his origins. But not now. He's too young to understand abandonment, to know that the man who gave him life chose not to be his father. Katherine nodded in agreement. There's time for that conversation. Right now, he only needs to know he's loved. And he is, Caldwell affirmed. By both of us, without reservation. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the yard of the home they had built together. The letter from St. Louis remained in Katherine's hand, a reminder of a past that had once brought pain but had ultimately led her to this life of happiness and fulfillment. What will you reply? Caldwell asked eventually. Katherine considered for a moment. I'll acknowledge receipt of their letter and inform them that William has been legally adopted, with his birth father's name never having been recorded on his birth certificate. Any claim would be complicated at best. And if there is money, if there's a significant sum, we can set it aside for William's future. If not, she shrugged. It doesn't matter. Our children will inherit the broken spur. They'll never want for anything important. Caldwell pressed a kiss to her temple. No, they won't. I promise you that. Later that evening, after the children were bathed and settled into bed with stories and kisses, Katherine sat at the small desk in their bedroom and composed her response to the St. Louis attorneys. Her words were polite but firm, making it clear that William had a father who had chosen him, loved him, and provided for him in all the ways that mattered. As she sealed the envelope, she felt Caldwell's hands on her shoulders, gently massaging the tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. Are you all right? He asked softly. She turned to look up at him, this man who had given her a home, a family, and love beyond anything she had dared to hope for. I'm more than all right, she assured him. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. Caldwell helped her to her feet and drew her into his arms. Do you ever wonder what might have happened if Richard hadn't left, if he had married you as he promised? Katherine considered the question, her hand resting over her husband's heart. Sometimes, she admitted. But then I look at our life here, at you, at our children, at everything we've built together, and I know that this is the life I was meant to have. Richard's abandonment brought me to you, and for that, I can only be grateful. Caldwell's eyes darkened with emotion. When you stepped off that stagecoach with William in your arms, something in me recognized you both as mine, even then. I just didn't know it yet. I think perhaps I did, Katherine confessed. Not consciously, but something in me knew this was where we belonged. He pulled her closer, his hand splaying protectively over her stomach where their newest child grew. You and William were the beginning of healing for me after Eliza. You brought life back to this house, to this ranch, to me. And you gave us a home when we needed it most, Katherine replied, rising on tiptoe to brush her lips against his. You gave William a father who chose him, who wanted him. You gave me a love I could trust. Outside their window, the vast Arizona sky was alive with stars, a tapestry of light against the darkness. The broken spur lay quiet around them, its buildings and fences and cattle all testimony to the life they had built and continued to build together. It was a good life, Katherine thought, not perfect, not without challenges or sorrows, but strong and true and deeply satisfying. A life born from hardship and loss but transformed into something beautiful by choice and commitment and love. "My baby's father abandoned us both," she had admitted to Caldwell that day long ago when he'd spoken of legally adopting William. "His name isn't on the birth record yet," he had replied, already planning to give William his own name, his own legacy. And in that exchange had been the seed of everything that followed: a new father claiming a son not of his blood but of his heart, a new beginning for a woman who had thought her dreams lost, a family created not by obligation but by choice. As Caldwell led her to bed, his hand warm and steady in hers, Katherine sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the strange and winding path that had brought her to this place of belonging. Her journey west had begun in desperation, but had led to a destiny far greater than she could have imagined: a true home, a loving husband, and the knowledge that sometimes what seems like abandonment is merely the closing of one door so that another, better one can open.